is good to see everyone. I want to start by just welcoming everyone. My name is Kelly Lawler. I am the principal of this beautiful school. And it is an honor and a privilege to welcome you all here. For those of you who might not know, this school has a very special place in my heart, not because I have the privilege of leading it every day, but because I went to Crestwood as a child. So this is where I learned to love learning and reading, and so I jumped at the chance to be able to come back and try to give that to your children and our community's children every day. So now that we know that there's potential for Crestwood to get some improvements, I think it's an exciting time and one that we really love to hear from the community about as well. And so I thank you for being here, and thank you to our board members who are here, and our central office support as well, because it truly does take a village, and here at Crestwood we really do appreciate our village. So with that, I believe I am passing the mic
to me, I believe.
To, yes, Miss Stanford.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. While they're doing that mic exchange, I am going to invite our board member, Nikki Vandermeulen, up to give a word of welcome.
Thank you, Carletra. And hold that for 1 second while I mic. Could you? Yes, please, because I'm going to break it. And we're live, what can I say? Just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. As you know, Crestwood is a major part of our schools, and like all of you, you want the best schools for yourselves and for your children. Things like central air conditioning, it is a wee bit warm in here, other problems can be addressed, but we need your help. Right now, we can fund it to the best of our ability, but, and I stress but, a way state law is designed is that public education has not kept funding, has not come up with inflation. Now you deserve better. We deserve better as a state and as a board. That's why we're coming to you as partners. And we want to thank you guys for coming. We want you to fill out the dream board and to fill out questions, and we can tape them up and we can answer any questions you may have, because this is your school too. And our children deserve the best. They are our future, so we need to provide it. I want to thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you, Principal Lawler, and thank you, Board Member Vandermeulen, for bringing those warm words of welcome to us today. My name is Carletra Stanford, and I am the Assistant Superintendent for School Leadership. And we just want to thank you right away for coming and being with us this evening to provide feedback and to just give us your thoughts around the facilities and the 2024 referenda. Before we get started, we're going to do some housekeeping. We do have interpretation available if you need Spanish interpretation, if you need Hmong interpretation, or ASL. So those folks are here to help anyone that would need interpretation tonight.
Si alguien prefiere escuchar esta presentación en español, por favor que nos lo diga y le podemos dar un aparato para escuchar la interpretación simultánea. Gracias. Nhớ trong món ăn đến món sài lùm món trong món ăn kia món ăn này từ từ cái ship hàng món ăn ấy có chuyện tiếng hàng từ từ hỗ trợ.
We'd also like to recognize Board Member Simpkins that's here tonight as well, if you just want to wave. And also our partners from the Madison Public School Foundation. And if there are any other I don't see any other board members, but any other folks here? Okay. Also want anyone from central office that's here to support, if you could just wave as well. Thank you. All right, and we also, again, just want to welcome you and just let you know how important it is for us to receive your feedback tonight. We have a lot of information that we'll be sharing with you, and so you do have note cards that are in front of you. And so at any time during the evening, if you have questions, please write your questions down on those note cards. We'll have moments that we will pause to collect those note cards, and then we will address those questions that you have at the end of the evening. All right. So we want to start off this evening by giving you some demographics about MMSD. So MMSD has more than 25,000 students in 52 schools and over 6,000 staff members. So our demographic breakdowns of our student body, about 60% of our students identify in one of the racial categories defined by the state. We also want you to note, because some of you had a different experience in Madison in 1970, if you were looking at the same list, it would be 13%. So you can see our demographics listed here: 39% white, 25% Hispanic, 7% Asian, 18% Black or African American, 10% two or more races. You can also see that our English language learners that percentage continues to go up, and our economically disadvantaged, collected by the students who qualify for free and reduced price meals, that has hovered right around 50% for some time in our district. You can also see that there are a lot of great highlights and things that we have to celebrate with the excellence in our district. We have dual language immersion programs that are in 21 of our schools. 26 National Merit Scholars last year, and that's something to truly celebrate. We set a record for our district in terms of the number of advanced placement tests that were taken by students last year. 61% of our high school students earn college credit before graduation, and that is something truly to be celebrated. And again, 4,000 students took the advanced placement test. Something that I am truly proud of, as I've been here since we've started this, but our 4K expansion, we now have 4K either half day or full day in 27 of our 32 elementary schools. We really want to highlight the areas that we're looking to address in the referendum, and that includes early learning. Again, that's part of our 4K expansion. Multilingual education, well-rounded opportunities offering a diverse array of co-curricular opportunities, and expanded career and technical education programming to allow for hands-on learning experiences and exploration. And I'm just gonna say this because Cindy Green is not here, but our well-rounded opportunities that we provide for our scholars is truly a game changer. If you know Cindy, she says it every time we do the referendum, so. And it truly is a game changer. And then we also want to talk about culture and climate. Our teachers and staff work hard every day to ensure that we are creating thriving schools for our students, and that we are creating, creating positive learning environments for our students as well. So you spoke and we listened. So this is not the first session that we've had. We've had sessions previous to this. There were 14 input sessions in the winter and in the spring. We conducted a survey with 4,000 responses from MMSD families, students, and staff, and also community members. There are also 3 superintendent advisory committee meetings and 1 community leader think tank. With all of that information and feedback that we were able to receive from the survey, from the meetings, from the input sessions, there are themes that emerge that we want to also make sure that we're bringing to the top today. We know that staffing is a priority. staff retention, compensation, and working conditions. Can you go to the next slide? Whoever's doing my slides. We also know that that people want to know the difference between renovate and building new. Community focus on middle schools in need of improvement, along with the addition of a new high school. And there's an interest in creating flexible learning spaces for our students. And the third theme was providing a comfortable learning environment, which includes the heating and ventilation and air conditioning most needed for our facility improvements. So the person that's going to bring you the bulk of the information is going to come from Bob tonight. But before he starts speaking, we are going to show you a video of the budget process for public school districts, because we know that that process is truly complex. And this is just a video that really breaks down the information in a way that we hope will have you to reflect on why we're in the position that we're in, why we need to go to referendum, and what that means for state funding. So with that, we will start the video.
Our public schools are the cornerstone of our community. The education and opportunities we provide for students today shape their futures and ours. Schools, like any organization, need money to operate. But in Wisconsin, funding the needs of our schools has been a growing challenge. State policy limits how much school districts can spend. The vast majority of school funding comes from a combination of state dollars and local property taxes. It's called the revenue limit, and it acts as a cap per student that school districts can spend each year. Even if school costs go above this level, schools can't spend any more than this limit. From 1994 to 2009, these revenue caps were adjusted for inflation, which meant they helped schools keep up with ongoing needs. But since 2010, the resources districts need to survive have fallen farther and farther behind the basic costs to operate our schools. By the end of 2025, the revenue limit will have fallen more than $3,300 per student behind inflation. In the Madison Metropolitan School District, with roughly 25,000 students, that's a decrease of more than $82 million. What's more, each district has a different revenue cap, and these caps are not tied to the needs of the students or the costs to the schools that serve them. Our job as a school district is to make sure all of our students have access to the exceptional educational opportunities we provide, no matter what their needs when they walk through our doors. But state funding falls short of what it costs to meet the specific needs of many of our students. When that happens, we have to use money from our general fund to cover the difference, which means taking dollars from other important needs. The largest portion of our budget goes towards staffing. Our people are the heart of our schools. Without enough educators who instruct, support, and inspire learning, schools can't provide the lessons, programs, and opportunities our students deserve. Other important budget items include curriculum, technology, transportation, operations, and maintenance. We work hard to balance our budgets, yet resources for schools have been shrinking year after year since 2010. With costs growing faster than funding, districts are always looking for ways to trim costs and work smarter, like deferring needed school maintenance, cutting programs, reducing staff, and many other strategies. But schools can only cut so much before they start to harm educational opportunities for their students. To maintain class sizes, keep up with rising costs, take care of school buildings, and protect high-quality instruction, many districts have turned to their community to help fill the state-imposed funding gap. Since the arrival of revenue limits, over 80% of school districts have done so by asking local voters to raise their caps through an operational referendum. Most have used the option multiple times. Our children don't have time to wait for state policymakers to fix the school funding system. By putting the needs of our students first, we are investing in their potential and the future of our whole community. Strong schools make strong communities where families want to move and stay. Learn more about school funding by visiting our website.
Okay, this is where I make my standard joke about AI and videos taking over your knowledge learned over decades of school finance. But the key of the video that we want you to take away and spend a little time on is explaining school finance in Wisconsin in terms of how the law is set up regarding revenues. So since the mid-late 90s, the state legislature has limited the amount of annual revenues a school board can collect. Initially, when those revenue limits were put in place, revenue was indexed to inflation. So every year, no matter what, revenue went up and tied to the CPI. 12 years ago or so, the state decided to decouple annual increases based on inflation to revenue and actually cut statewide $550 of revenue per child across the state. And that is when they passed the Act 10 and said, boards, you have tools to make up your costs. We're taking this revenue away from you. Same time, they decoupled the revenue limits from inflation. Now, since that time, inflation has gone up, as we all know, in terms of CPI. So our costs have continued to increase without a corresponding sustainable revenue stream to match those annual increases in costs. So to put it in perspective, in the last 2 years, if our revenue limits had been indexed to inflation in Madison, we would have an additional $30.2 million. Little under 21 million last year, little over 9 million this year, combined $32 million that we begin not having sufficient sustainable revenues to meet the ongoing costs that the school board and school communities have in Madison. Now, what the law also says when the law was changed was if a board doesn't feel they have sufficient revenues, their option is to go to the voters via referendum and ask the voters to give you ongoing sustainable revenues. The great thing about Madison is the board has several times over the years asked the public, most recently back in 2020, for operating dollars and for facility dollars to renovate our comprehensive high schools, build a new Southside Elementary School, renovate Hoyt in the Capitol High, all of which are beautiful spaces. If you haven't had an opportunity to check those places out, you really should. So the good news is the Madison school community has responded and has approved additional revenues for the board. I want to talk a little bit more about the funding gaps that are part of both federal and state law. A little bit about special education and students that need individualized education plans. Madison is an inclusive educational environment, has historically been known for doing a stellar, wonderful job of providing the needs for kids that are identified needing additional services throughout their school career. That has a cost to it. Historically, back in the early 70s, I think it was 71, when the federal government passed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Nikki knows, she's gonna fact check me. 1973.
98 passed, 1990 is 188.
Thank you, Nikki. And so at the time, the federal government said, we'll give you about 40% of those costs to implement this federal law. State law shortly thereafter was changed to match federal law, and the state had a commitment at the time above 2/3 for state support. Since that time, the legislature has removed that specific percentage requirement and said, you'll get a reimbursement rate of whatever the money we provide divided by the costs in the state. What that has ended up meaning is the federal government gives us anywhere from 10 to 13 cents on the dollar instead of 40 cents on the dollar, or 40%. And the state last year was about 31% in terms of reimbursement. What that means is it's critical for us to provide the service for the students, and we do, but it creates a funding gap in state law, which means last year we had to move $66.4 million from our general fund pot of money that we use to operate all of our schools to pay for those costs. It's not unique to Madison. Statewide, that number is $1.5 billion. And this is where I add the legislature has also collected income taxes and is sitting on a reserve worth billions of dollars, but has refused to, I believe, equitably share in the costs of local public schools, right? Now, Some have said on occasion that we're blaming others for our issues. I like to say, no, I'm not blaming. I fully understand the law. I want to explain the law, explain the context, and then I say, the legislature made it clear. If boards feel they need more revenues, they have to ask their voters. And so that's what the Madison School Board has done. Finally, on an inequitable funding issue is four-year-old kindergarten. Madison has invested, as Carletra shared with us, full-day four-year-old kindergarten and early literacy programs, full-day programs, four-year-old students, full-time child, 1.0 as we say in terms of a head count, but the state considers that child 0.5 or 0.6 depending on the program. So we have full-day costs, but the state aids that four-year-old kindergarten as a half. So it's a built-in gap in revenues to costs. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about the investments that the Madison School Board has made and the community has made in our investment in our facilities. For the last several years, the board has levied specifically $5 million for facilities maintenance and improvement. Since 2008, they've raised $93 million to supplement the Fund $10, our general ops dollars, to put into our facilities. Our issue is there's no way under revenue limits our ongoing annual revenues can pay for the renovation of a school such as this or build new schools if the decision is made to build new schools. And so the board has asked for that facilities question. Last fall, we did a facilities condition report that analyzed all the schools that weren't being renovated through the 2020 referendum or built new. And of those 46 or so schools that were evaluated, 26 of those schools are 60 years or older. 40 of our schools received the grade of a C or D. And you have some handouts in front of you that will talk about what that grade means and how that was calculated. But the point being is we have aging facilities. Madison is the oldest school district in Dane County, and we have invested and improved the facilities, but there's no way our annual dollars can maintain the facilities moving forward without seeking voter approval for additional revenues. So, in June, the board approved two referendum questions. One is operating dollars, the money we need to invest in diverse staff, retain staff, and early literacy programs. The other is $507 million to focus on 7 school sites, 10 schools in total. 2 of those would be major renovations. Crestwood is one of them, Anana Elementary is the other. The other middle schools and elementary schools are recommended to be built new. On the operations side, and I just kind of reiterate the goals of the board that Carletra mentioned, our operations referendum, it does sustain our existing operating budget, but it's so much more than that. It continues the investments that have been made, community schools, our Grow Your Own programs, the investments the board has made the last few years for mental health, school psychologists, and counselors, right? It's really a commitment to excellence in terms of the standards of the board and the school community. But the focus really has been attracting and retaining high-quality staff, continuing to invest in that four-year-old kindergarten, the multilingual programs, give me the, no one normally tells me to speak louder, so I guess I get to speak louder. Multilingual programs, our DSI programs are at 21 of our schools, and then the well-rounded, which is really important to note. As we all know, school is much more than the classes on the schedule. It's the clubs, it's the after-school activities, it's the connections that can be made in the school building. So in terms of continuing the commitment to excellence and investing in the future, that's really what the referendum questions are asking. I have to check my notes because there's some place in here I'm supposed to pause again for questions. We're not there yet, after this slide. Yes, I'm following the script, kinda. Okay, so the first one, I want to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the $100 million in terms of operations. It'll be scaffold and increases over 4-year increments. So this fall, if approved, it would give the board the authority to raise taxes by an additional $30 million above that state revenue limit that I've explained earlier. The second year would add another $30 million. The fourth year, which would be 27, would add $20 million. And then the fourth year would add that final installation of $20 million for a total of $100 million in additional, and I have to stress, authority for the board to have to fund any of the initiatives, right? The board still decides every year how much to raise taxes based on the needs of the district and the community. So this first year, that $30 million, estimated to be an additional $26 a month. In the fourth year, when fully in effect, that goes up to $87 a month. Now, I want to put a little note in here. Although this is ongoing, really don't want to predict what taxes are going to be 4 years out. I'm really not even comfortable about doing it 2 months out until we get some of our information from the state, right? School finance is based on the third Friday in September counts, which are tomorrow, and information that the state provides us on October 15th. October 15th, you heard me right, of this year, and the board has to set a levy at the end of October. So the way school finance is set up, you get information in real time, and then we have to do the calculations in the state formulas, and the board has to levy in the fall for this year's operating dollars, right? It's complicated, but that's just the way the law is, right? Mechanical and plumbing infrastructure, including air conditioning. It is an important aspect, right? We've done, as Carletra mentioned, we've done a lot of surveys, a lot of community inputs, and believe it or not, high on the list of a lot of families and community members is the need to upgrade our mechanicals, including air conditioning. And given the status of our climate and our weather changes, it really is integral to update not only the educational environment, but the mechanicals of the facilities. And so I want to focus on what this facilities referendum is about. And Carletra is going to talk a little bit more about modernizing the school facilities. The facility questions and how we've approached it in terms of estimating and costing out the renovation and the build new is all centered on modernizing our educational facilities. Remember I told you 26 of our schools are over 60 years old. Many of our schools are old and they've served their purpose but have passed their useful life. Our mechanical systems, for example, HVAC, plumbing, particularly the furnace, are so old that the manufacturers don't exist. They don't make parts on the market. We actually use tool and die and design and build our own parts to replace, which is necessary to maintain the facilities, but it's an inefficient and not a cost-effective way to be using our facilities dollars. And in terms of modernizing our classrooms, we'll talk more about STEM, flexible classroom space, important the sustainability measures of the board. The board adopted their long-term sustainability to be zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. So our facilities referendum has built that equation into it in terms of not only updating the facilities, but being sustainable looking to the future. A little bit more about the $507 million. These are the lists of schools that are covered. Crestwood is obviously on them. It's considered a renovation. The facility question is different. It's $507 million. And what that $507 million does is authorize the board to sell bonds to pay the construction bills as they come due. And the construction is going to happen, if approved by the voters, over a 5-year period. And so we'll sell bonds as our bills come due. I would say when we're estimating and projecting, it's possibly 3 or 4 different bond sales, which is why the 23 years are in there. So every time we sell bonds to pay our construction costs, we enter into a 20-year principal and interest payment schedule. And so they'll go 20 years. Initially, the first year of the impact, not in 2024, but in 2025, because when we sell the bonds, we won't have to make our first payments until a year later. So when it comes in, we're initially estimating the cost to be $27 a month, very similar to that $30 million in terms of the operating at $26 a month. And so that'll go for the life of the bonds over the life of the project. Now, the same caveat applies for the first one, right? This is out for 4 years. A lot can change, right? Our school financing is really contingent on two things: what the state legislature decides on revenue limits and how much the state legislature is willing to give us state aids. Many of us in school finance hope with fairer legislative maps, we might have a legislature soon that would invest a little bit more on the state resources in the public school and education. And under revenue limits, if a district gets more state aids, they are allowed and required to levy less, right? So projecting out what levy impacts are 20 years out is really, I can put numbers in a spreadsheet and come up with estimates, but it's really difficult. So we're good about these estimates for 4 years. And again, we'll continue to update the board every year on the costs of the referendum and the cost of the program to move forward. I want to talk about the 10 schools and why these facilities. So the 10 schools, 7 sites are geographically located. You can see it on the map. Obviously, you know where Crestwood is. The only thing the board has decided for certain is our first project, if approved, we're going to focus on Shabazz and Sherman. Shabazz High School, right? Why? And some folks have asked, why middle schools? And that lies in what the board and the community discussed back in 2020. In 2020, the board said we're going to focus on our comprehensive high schools and one of our alternative high schools, Capitol High, which they've taken care of. The next alternative high school we have is Shabazz City High School, which is paired with Sherman Middle School. And so that's our first school we know we want to talk about and get done first. Next, at the time, the board committed to upgrading the educational space for middle schools to make them true, modern, future-looking middle schools for education. And after that, to look at some elementary schools. Since that time, and based on that facility condition report we did back in the fall, we identified priority elementary schools that their mechanical systems were the worst, and we felt we couldn't wait any longer than this session. Anana and Crestwood fall into that category, which is why the board added Anana and Crestwood instead of focusing on the rest of the middle schools. So our first and foremost look at the 10 schools, 7 sites were the mechanical plumbing, mechanical HVAC, accessibility, with a focus on middle schools, and then the geographic location spread around the school district in terms of giving us some flexibility of where we would put students when we're either doing major renovations or building new. Some of you may not know, but when we did the comprehensive high schools, we did them over a period of really 3 years where students still attended those facilities as construction was going on. That worked and is common practice, but we do not want to do that with middle schools and elementary schools. And so this considering swing spaces is part of why the plan includes building new. We would maintain some of those middle elementary schools for a place to put students as we go to the next school if we're renovating and or building new and we don't have that space. Our plan, if approved, would be to focus on 2 sites. Some of them are paired, middle and elementary. So 2 sites could be 3 schools or 4 schools, and we would take that over a period of 5 years, if approved. Construction would not begin until the spring of 2026. So that means for our first 2 sites, the board's going to continue to focus on detailed conversations with the staff and the communities for each one of those schools to impact the final designs of those sites. And then that will also allow us to do the remaining sites as we plan for the phase construction in phase 2 and phase 3 as we move forward. So this grid is available for each one of the, I always forget, 44 or 46 schools we evaluated back in the fall of 23. And each site was evaluated on 14 standards. And you'll see on the upper right corner, mechanical HVAC, your handout. Kind of tiny to see, but it's on your handout. Mechanical HVAC and mechanical plumbing, which was one of our priorities. You'll also see specialty area needs in terms of accessibility, which was another one of our priorities. And then the other consideration we did was actually a mathematical formula to help us make decisions on whether we renovate or build new. but it's only one part of the conversation about do we recommend to the board to build new or renovate. It also had to do with the existing infrastructure, the school. Is this a school that we really want to demolish and build new, or build new and demolish? Part of that conversation has to do with the green space available at the sites that were selected, right? Many of the sites that we recommended to build new has significant space, green space, to allow us to do geothermal in terms of the boring, to allow us to really expand the school. And so the recommendation for Crestwood was to keep the space but do a major renovation and address the issues that we'll cover in the next slide. The recommendation is to spend $32 million. That's our budget for the renovations at Crestwood. Now, Nikki and I were talking in the break, and she wanted me to talk a little bit more, which is a good point, thank you, Nikki, about that swing space concept. Or what are we going to do when we're renovating this building, and where are we going to put the students, the scholars, and the staff that are here? We really have, as we can see, 3 broad options for swing space. An existing school that we have empty, underutilized elementary or middle schools that would require us to bus families, which is very expensive to bus, or possibly taking open space parking lots to bring in modular classrooms, right? And so we have time to plan. We'll be bringing in experts, both architects and construction management and other professionals in the field to come up with that plan. It hasn't been established yet, but to me, it's the most critical piece and the most complicated piece of how we're going to figure that out, right? As we move families, to give them clear timelines of when you're going to be here and for how long, and when you're coming back. Correct. And so, like I said, this is just the first of other conversations we're going to have, depending on the final decision. When we're done with all of our community sessions for this phase, we want to come back together as staff and come up with a list of which sites, if the referendum is successful, that we would focus on in the spring of 2026. So the specific plan, if we go to the next slide, that's the $32 million. That's part of the $507 million. Next one will be good. So the first is the mechanical upgrades, plumbing, HVAC, heating. And the important thing to note on the upgrades in terms of the renovations are, we're going to focus on what we believe, without having the input from the school and staff: safety and security, the accessibility, the energy efficiency and sustainability, and then work with the staff and the families about what other changes they want, what they like here, what they would like to see changed, which is a little bit we want to talk about when we talk about the dream boards at the end. I hand it back to Carletra.
And so this is the time when you get to go over to the dream boards. There's going to be a member of the central office staff that will be next to each board, and you will get to discuss what are those things that you would love to see in the next iteration of Crestwood Elementary School. So there's different boards. We are going to start with the libraries. Who's going over to the libraries? So Amy will be over at the libraries. Thank you. I need glasses, y'all. Monitored and controlled entry. Those don't, oh, yeah, sorry. Monitored and controlled entry. Who's over there? Thank you. Sustainability. Flexible and collaborative spaces. Accessibility, and flexible classrooms. So they are going to explain to you what each of those areas mean, and then again, you are going to dream around what does that mean for what you would like to see at Crestwood. So you can start off wherever you want to start, at whichever board you want to be at, and they will be there to answer questions, again, explain, and you will share your thoughts.
And then we'll come back with
and then you'll come back and we will answer the questions that you submitted. What questions do you have? All right, so you can start wherever you'd like over there.
Okay. So some of these may be a little bit out of order, but I'm just going to read them, and then I have answers for, I'd say I have answers for more than a majority. Maybe 2/3, maybe a little bit more than that. Okay. So the first question is the operating referendum to support the whole district or specific schools identified? It's an excellent question. First of all, you know, it's a bit of a cliche, but we've been doing the public sessions and we do the questions, and we always get good questions. I mean, these are good questions. So that's two answers. The $100 million request over 4 years is for the entire school district operations to use district-wide. The $507 million in terms of general obligation bonds, the way the question is worded and the way the law works is that $507 million can only be used for the purposes that are in the specific question that the voters approve. That question lists those 10 schools and then also says for additional sustainability, additional infrastructure, including potential demolition of those sites. So the $507 million in total is for those 10 schools. That $507 million is detailed in information that myself and our team put together, and it is a team, to the board in June. And that was based on individual sites and an analysis of if it was going to be renovated, like Annan and Crestwood, not adding any additional square footage, but use the footprint and do the substantial renovations. And then for the build new, it was determined in terms of those spaces, actually we added square footage to bring those to modern educational facilities. Once we determined the square footage, we spent a long time with our partners, actually the folks that built our schools in the 2020. Findorf Construction, Huffman and Keel, PRA, a couple different architectural firms, and our building services experts. And we sat down and came up with a square footage cost to include modernizing facilities and including sustainability costs. We took those two numbers, multiplied it by the square footage by each one of those sites, and came up with $507 million, right? So there's a dollar amount associated with each one of those facilities, and it's in a memo that we have on our website that we gave to the board in June that they used to determine the final questions. That answers another question that's coming up, which is why I went a little bit more detail on that one. If it passes, what is the construction timeline? Also a very good question. The construction timeline is fluid until we determine which sites we're going to work on. What's not fluid is, as we like to say, the construction folks, shovel in the ground until spring of 2026. And then our plan is to be completed with construction by fall of 2029. So about a 5-year period, the construction would happen over that timeline. Which facilities and when, as we talked about, we want to finish gathering the public input and then come up with a plan. And to me, the biggest difficulty of the plan is figuring out our swing spaces, right? Where are we going to move the families and students in the most economical way possible? And well, I'm not even going to say that. I was going to say with the least disruption. There's going to be disruption, right? I mean, you're moving whole schools. So, okay, if the facility referendum fails, what is Plan B? Another referendum next year, question mark? There's always Plan B, right? How I answer that, Nikki, you can't answer before me. Let me answer for you. Nikki said yes. It is an automatic in this sense, right? The way I answer that question is it does matter what happens at the referendum question, right? The question is yours to decide to support or not support. But regardless of the results of that November 5th referendum, just like any other year, in November is the first time I start talking to the board about the 25-26 school year budget, right? They vote in October for this year, and right away in November, I'll start saying, based on our best projections, this is our available revenue. Now, the results of that referendum will impact that question of what is available sustainable revenue, what is our estimate of our fund balance. And therefore, once you identify revenue, you identify the expenditure plan. And that's where you match expenditures to revenues, right? And so that's how that will happen. And is it possible for the board to go again to referendum? Yes, it is. The first time they would be able to go, if they choose to go that route, would be next spring or next fall, right? But that's a board decision, and no conversations like that have happened. Okay, have the formal bids for all this work already been completed, or is there a chance we may, what is this? Is there a chance may need to change in the future? The formal bids have not been completed. We are working on requests for proposals for owner's rep, which we have in and are evaluating it now. We want to take that recommendation to the board this month. We have the architectural RFP out, and then we'll do the following month a construction management RFP. All of those RFP and the work we're doing is all upfront work. Every one of those contracts has a provision that says if the referendum is not successful, it's not going to happen, right? But we are doing that work. But no specific plans for any of the schools have been determined. Other than Anana and Crestwood, our building services working with our architects have come up with renovation plans in terms of when they were prioritizing the need of mechanical upgrades. They have done some front work, but it's not been finalized, right? It's not been finalized. Okay, when will work on Crestwood start? Kind of talked about that. It's unclear at this time until we finish all of our public input sessions, and then we will decide the construction plan. Can you explain decision-making process, the Crestwood allocation? That's why I did that. The individual Crestwood projects. I have explained that one, I think. How many schools currently have monitored control entry? That is one I don't know. Amy, we're adding this to the Q&A list. Okay. I mean, all of our schools have some form of a secured entry. But when we're talking about secured entry in terms of moving the offices to the front, having a common entry that's clearly visible, and having access in for visitors and students, that's what we're talking about when we're saying upgrading to modern security and controlled entrances, right? We all have locked school buildings. It's all set up a little bit differently right now. How much has MSD spent on early literacy initiatives? What did these expenses cover? Will the same programs continue to be funded after operational referendum? Carletra, answer. No, I'm just kidding. That's one that we'll have to do some research on this. So on the first ones, I don't have the breakout. We'll try to get that number. And in terms of the details of what those are, I briefly touched on it, but it's worth restating. Oh, Jen wants to give some answers. Let her rip, Jen.
We did buy new curriculum that was evaluated based on the science of reading, and that new curriculum, K-5, was bought 2 years ago. It was slightly over $5 million for curriculum for both bilingual and English. And then we bought new curriculum as well in 6 through 8 for our middle schools, also bilingual and English. And if I'm remembering correctly, please don't quote me on that, I think it was just under $3 million for that.
But that doesn't include like letters.
Wow, that's
Right.
just 2 numbers for me.
Including investment in teachers.
Yes.
For
Training.
Professional
training.
development, yes.
As those, we're preparing for Act 20, so getting ahead of that work too. So we've been ongoing work in literacy, and all of that work will continue.
Including smaller class sizes in kindergarten and first grade, as well to have an intentional focus on literacy. So add all that together.
There you go, team. And then the next question about what will be funded after the operational referendum, that question is answered every year when the board looks at its existing programs and makes determinations on what to fund year to year, right? Which will begin in November. Really happens in earnest in spring of 2025 for the 25-26 school year, because we'll start getting better numbers in terms of some of the projections and revenues and kind of cost estimates, student enrollment projections, and that sort of thing. I want to backtrack a little bit. This one was about the $32 million seems like an excessive amount of money to spend on a renovation. If only 16 mil is necessary for building upgrades, it's possible to only spend the 16 million and keep my taxes lower. Also another excellent question. So again, the $507 million a max. It's an estimate that we recommended to the board what we would need to do the work that I talked about. This renovation, the Anana renovation, and the other work. We're not allowed by federal law to sell bonds for anything that we don't have a true cost. And so if our estimates are higher, right? If we don't need the 507 and we only have costs that are 450 or somewhere less, the money can only be used for the purposes in that referendum question, right? And so if the costs come in lower, we won't sell bonds to pay those costs. We can't, right? It's prohibited. And it's good system, but there's a lot of overlay. There's an independent law firm, there's independent financial consultants. They ask you a ton of questions, and then they ask you a ton more questions, and so they look at our numbers in terms of our estimates and our costs. So it's a good process. Keeps everybody straight and true. Yes?
Part of that, very simply, I know people are worried of the cost of the facilities referendum. And we've heard a lot about, oh, why don't you close schools and make it easier? The issue is we would have to bus and change it for families. The other issue is accessibility. Accessibility is a major issue. I'm sitting here today, and I'm going to use myself, TJ and Bob, because one guy today was good anyway. But plain and simple, 40 years ago, my parents filed a complaint suit against my elementary school to allow me to eat through school because of my cerebral palsy and my autism. I was supposed to be institutionalized. That was 40 years ago. I want better than what we have for these students. I want better than what I could have had instead of having to sit in the back of the classroom where I could plug in my computer away from everyone else because I might be too distracted. I want people who actually are
take a shower when I get home.
the community
Take a shower when I
and
get
are
home.
part of the community. That's why. Right now, we have some middle schools, Blackhawk, parts of it are not handicap accessible. So that means there are people who cannot attend their home school. That's a problem. That needs to be fixed. So yes, I understand, and I'm not minimizing the tax burden one bit, and I understand. But that's part of the key reason why we're doing what we're doing. Bob's great with numbers and does a heck of a job. I'm more of a people.
Thanks, Dickie.
Go ahead.
Thank you. If inflation outpaces costs, does the board have the authority to go over the amount? No, right? The referendum questions are maximums allowed. They cannot go over, and they just give the board the authority, right? So just like today, in terms of the questions, in terms of operations, the board will look at their sustainable revenues against their costs, and if they feel they need to ask, if the law doesn't change, then they could consider asking again. And we talked about the max of that $507 million and what that means. Okay. Why isn't there a taxpayer representative being placed on all boards that make decisions on all the schools? The taxpayers need to be represented. We need a taxpayer representative from the beginning. That's a good question. I answer that by saying the taxpayer representative is the school board, right? The school board's locally elected. They're limited by law what they can tax under the revenue limits. But I will say, Carletra talked about the committees that we put together, the input that we seek, the input that we're going to continue to seek on these plans and other plans in terms of the facilities, right? They are going to be the communities of the schools, which from my perspective is the taxpayers, right? But we're locally elected school boards. That's the ultimate representative. Okay, funding advocacy. Oh, this is near and dear to my heart. There's so many things near and dear to my heart. They all usually have to do with some numbers somewhere along the way. All right, anyways, is anything being done currently to advocate for increased state funding so that voters don't need to keep patching the issue every few years by Madison and as well as the other organizations? And add the city of Madison too. It's the same boat, right? So the legislature has curtailed ongoing revenues and has decided how much state aid they will provide to local municipalities. School boards are one of them, cities are another, towns are another, right? And so we've talked some about how we can be more active. There are many associations that do lobby, that are registered lobbyists to state legislatures to provide more funds to public schools, to provide more funds to the city of Madison. But my answer is right now, it's kind of a waste of time, right? Because the legislature has no interest in listening or hearing. But I say the optimism to me is the Supreme Court saying we're going to have fairer legislative maps, right? So in time, the hope is the representatives will be reflective of the people of Wisconsin. And I believe all people of Wisconsin really love and want to support their local public schools. So that's where the change is going to happen. But yes, we always provide information to the statewide organizations. I respond to questions on school finance. Before I came to the district, I worked at the state level for a long time, more than a couple of decades, and I'm used to and do present on school finance with legislators and other associations. So I started my career staffing the Joint Committee on Finance at the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. It was great fun. I got to see how the sausage is made, as they say. I don't want to work there anymore. Okay, I love working for the district. The middle schools to be replaced are currently populated with below capacity. This is a good question. Since we don't know where student population growth will occur, was consolidating middle schools considered, or building to current population with options to expand later? That's an excellent question. And I answer it this way. We are doing research, we're constantly monitoring student enrollment. So on the high level, Madison has been serving about 25,000 students for a long time, likely to continue somewhere in that neighborhood. But regardless, we will continue to monitor student enrollments. We've got some long-range student enrollment studies being done, and demographics in terms of where people and kids are living does change. But regardless, the middle schools we're focusing on are only a handful compared to the 12 middle schools that exist today. And we know as a community, we're always going to need our middle schools, which is why the board has picked geographically located middle schools across the district to allow us flexibility to make any changes. Changing student demographics could result, right? But it is really important to understand that our facilities need attention now, and the board does not believe we should wait anymore, right? Which is why the question is before the public. Okay, I think this might be the last one. Are there school-based professional staff serving on the committees for the next phase of facility upgrades should the referendum pass? There absolutely will be staff input and family input, as we talked about earlier, for each one of the impacted schools. Obviously, we have folks at central office and principals that we talk to all the time in terms of school level experience. Dr. Gothard, Joe, our new district administrator, y'all know him. If you don't, grew up in Madison, went to Madison schools, taught in Madison schools, was an administrator here, now back leading our district. So school input, school building input, teacher classroom input, and school communities, high priority for the board and Dr. Gothard's administration. So continue to seek input on the final plans that we, before we put in. Okay, any other questions? Not bad. Oh, get your phones out. We ask you to do the survey, scan the QR code. Amy's got it over there. There's one over there. We really want to collect the survey information. It's very helpful for us to know, in addition to the input that we're getting tonight. Nikki, thank you for your help and the input you added. Very insightful. Very appreciative. And Laura, too. Thanks for coming.
So I'm gonna the opportunity here to talk you through sort of a dreaming phase. It's incredibly unusual, and there are so very few opportunities for school communities to design a brand new school, and we want to really maximize this opportunity and hope that we have that opportunity for you all this fall. We're going to think about different and specific areas, and I'd invite you to think about what exists here already around flexible classrooms, around gymnasium space, the cafeteria where students spend time between classes, the library, and also other things like accessibility, parts of the building that certain students can never get to. Safety and security, how students and visitors and families would enter the building to ensure secure entry, and as Bob mentioned, also sustainability. you have at your table pink and yellow Post-it notes, and I want to sort of differentiate those both for you and ask you to use the Sharpies at your table to write some things on as I work my way through these boards. On the pink, you're writing things that you like or appreciate and that you would like to be the same, meaning we have this, we want to make sure we have that again as we design a new building. So pink is for things you want to stay the same or want to make sure that they exist in the new design. The yellow Post-it notes are for things that you would like to be different, things that you see in these images that you've seen in other schools that you don't have now that you would like to be included. So again, pink is for things that should stay the same, yellow are things that you would like added into your design. At the end of the presentation, I'll ask you to then go put those up kind of by the picture that represents that thing you either want to keep or add. We'll take pictures of those, and then all the Post-it notes are pulled back together to document. So starting with flexible and collaborative spaces, we're in the business of instruction. How can spaces be leveraged to help our students learn more effectively? Flexible spaces that allow for different kinds of teaching and learning than we've had or been able to do in the past. Seeing students use spaces in ways we're not used to seeing in our more traditional spaces. And so I'll work my way through a variety of slides here. So on this slide, you can see students have a variety of seating, and they have places where they can collaborate and work together outside of classrooms and in common areas. Next slide. Here you can see how we have spaces for students to hang out. We have a whiteboard here so students collaborate, cafe height tables for students to have a separate conversation while in that same area. You can also see natural light as a fixture in some of these spaces. Next slide. Here you can see one example of how larger common areas can be included, and you see what's referred to as a social stair. If any of you have toured Bell Phillips Memorial since their renovation, they have one of these in what used to be a courtyard at the school. You can also see other flexible areas for seating. You have walkways up above, and these spaces can also be used after the school day for performances, presentation, and focus on the arts. Next slide. You can see how carpeting can be different colors to designate different classroom spaces, different age groups, different grade levels. You also have glass walls that can be closed to create smaller instructional areas, opened up to create more flexible use of a much larger space. Again, you see different kinds of seating that create spaces for individual students, small groups, or large groups. Here again, you can see different kinds of a more traditional, sort of modernized individual student desk. And here you can also see where there's sort of a smaller isolated area of the whiteboard so groups of students could go in and work separately. Back here, the same thing. So you could have students break into groups and break into those areas separately. Here you can see how you have bright colors, again, natural light coming into the space, and then furniture that's tied to those spaces to sort of create sense of identity in different parts of the building. Next slide. This is another example of how flexible seating can be incorporated into a common area. This could be a classroom, this could be a cafeteria, there's a sink over here, there's a place to put slides up here, and then wherever we have ceilings that are a little bit higher, then there would be treatments to make sure that sound still travels the way that it should in those large areas to prevent echoing. Next slide. This is an image of a space that is in our Southside Elementary on Madison Southside in that new school, where in what used to just be a common area, creating a smaller space where a teacher can meet with a small group of students, do some targeted instruction. Students could meet, gather, and then you can see that there's whiteboards integrated in that space to again facilitate teaching. Moving on, let's talk about accessibility. We want to make sure that our spaces are inclusive and welcoming and are tightly tied to the sort of school culture and climate that we want to create, ensuring universal design so that every single person that comes to our school buildings feels they belong and can access all of our spaces. Next slide. Here you can see a ramp allowing students to sort of seamlessly transition from one level to the next, and then you have flexible seating in a variety of levels, again with integrated panels that could be used for instruction. Next slide. Again, another example of a ramp that currently could be just a flight of stairs, but you carve out a little bit of extra space and make that a ramp so that it becomes ADA compliant. Next slide. Here you can see open bathrooms and accessible sinks. Again, drinking fountains at different levels, but most of the bathrooms in our new high schools don't have doors and are open, sort of airport style. Most new schools are designed in that way, again, creating more flexible use. Next slide. Moving on, talking again more specifically about classroom spaces, we want our teachers and staff to create thriving learning environments, and they need spaces that support them in doing that. Different desk options, multiple learning spaces. We talked again about flexible sized groupings, either from the large group down to individual student. We'll work our way through a couple slides here. Especially in our high schools, you see some of this where you have some tables and desks that are a little bit higher and some that are lower to sort of naturally create different groupings within a classroom space. Next slide. Here you can see different, again, use of different colors in a classroom to sort of designate different learning areas. Again, large windows and natural light. Next slide. Here's another example where you have integrated sort of counters that allow you to do lab space, a space for the teacher, and again, a lot of natural light. Next slide. Thinking about libraries, here we are. Libraries is sort of the heart of literacy and where we want students to hang out, love picking up books and working their way through them. We also want them to be shared spaces that are sort of collectively owned by all the teachers of the school and they're comfortable bringing their classrooms in. Next slide. Again, very colorful, lots of natural light. If you've been in the libraries of, again, our new high schools, they look more like this with all sorts of flexible seating around the edges and as much natural light as possible. Next slide. Fun shapes for bookshelves, again, to sort of create different areas within the library. Over on the right, you can see more flexible seating at different heights. Again, lots of natural light and windows. Next slide. Here you can see, again, lots of natural light, another cubby area. Again, the purpose of this and these light fixtures, just to sort of inspire some of your thinking around how spaces could look and where you would like to be, where you'd like your children to be. Next slide. Again, use of colors. Here you can see the colors are here. You have a bright wall and then you have lots of different bookshelves in different places and lots of natural light. Next slide. Monitored and controlled entry, we want to also be mindful of safety as we work our way through it. So I'll show you a couple of examples of what some of those safe entries could look like. Here you have students who are entering and checking in the building that way and then are buzzed in. Next slide. This is another example that shows a double entry so that students coming in after school starts would come in, go into the Welcome Center and check in, and then into the school building. Students who are leaving go out through both of those doors. If you think about your entries the way that they are now, when it's cold outside and the doors are open and all the students are streaming in, the building will drop temperature 10 or 15 degrees in that area until everybody's in, the school day starts, and then it slowly warms its way back up. All of our high schools have been redesigned with double entries to make them more energy efficient. Next slide. Here's another example of how you can use the architecture to sort of help create a more welcoming common entry point so you can see from across the way when you're driving up and visitors would know exactly where they're coming. Signage and again, architectural features that make the school building and the school community unique. Next slide. Sustainability. We've touched on this a few times, but also just wanting to make sure that we want the building to last for a very long time, and in order to do that, we also want it to be sort of energy efficient and sustainable in ways that our current buildings are not. Let's look at a couple of examples. Again, here you can see use of sort of wide open spaces that allow for air to move pretty freely. You also have cathedral ceilings in different places that allow for air to move around, and then again, using lots of natural light, both up above and down below, reducing the amount of lighting that we need in the space. Next slide. And this again is back to Southside Elementary with a little bit of a green roof, a big skylight, and an outdoor classroom where teachers can meet. So let's shift back to our Post-it notes. Again, ideally you have your pink ones where you're writing down things that you like or would like to keep. On your yellow, you're writing down things that maybe you saw here that you would like added in that you don't have. And if you end up with things on either Post-it note, whatever you have, put it over here. We'll be able to make sense of it. Before we get up and sort of open this up into a little bit more of a Q&A forum to interact, mingle around, look at these pictures, and dialogue a little bit, I wanted to put up the QR code, if we could. So as we sort of wrap up the formal presentation this evening, I want to thank you for your engagement and for being here. I know there's a lot of information to process. But we value you taking the time out of your evening to come and sort of hear from us, learn a little bit more about what we're hoping to do for our school communities. Before you go, you can use your phone to submit this survey. That would be great. But at this time, we're also just going to open it up and allow you to put your Post-it notes on these boards, talk with each other, and talk with us. Go ahead.